and welcome to the Game of Growth podcast. My name is John Cassidy-Rice.
And I'm Miles Cassidy-Rice.
And this week we're talking about...
engagement.
It's starting to become a thing now.
Yeah. So what is engagement?
Engagement. So one way to think about engagement, you know when you're working on a project, or you're doing something, or reading a book, or maybe even lost in TV sometimes.
We've got to do Wednesday of the week.
We can come back to it.
Okay. I just feel like it's going to throw if we go talk about engagement and then go to Wednesday week and then...
Right, okay, we'll start again.
Okay.
Take 3. Don't know why I do that. I know why I do it, but I don't think I use it anymore. It's for editing, so you can see a spike in the sound, yeah. Hello and welcome to the Game of Growth. My name is John Cassidy-Rice.
And I'm Miles Cassidy-Rice.
And we're playing and talking about positive psychology and a positive life. So, we normally start the session off with wins of the week or wins of the day. So what's your win?
So my win of the week is getting to go and see Keo go and play football this morning. I say play football, it's very unstructured at 2 years old, right? But they always do this activity, just a simple colour matching task where they have cones scattered around the field and they have to match the colour to the correct coloured cone. And he's so absorbed in that activity, and it's just so cute to watch him like find the cone and then run as fast as he can to get it over to the other cone. So that's my win of the week.
Well, I'm going to build on that one because I took him last week, didn't I? So
yeah.
Although technically it was last week, it was beginning of the week. It depends on when you start your week.
Okay, you start yours on Saturdays, I start mine on Mondays.
Yeah. And I took him to the same football part, and he did that activity. And then we had a little play in the playground. And then it's his big brother's turn to do it. And they had a bit of an obstacle course. And he each thought he'd join in. So they let him join in, and he ran the obstacle course. It was such a delight to see.
And we do also appreciate seeing Kit, the older one, play as well.
Yes, he's good fun.
I'm very good at matching colours as well.
Yeah. Yeah, he gives me the biggest smiles and cuddles. I love Kit.
Awesome. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about engagement.
Engagement, yes, indeed. An important aspect of life. So a way to sum up engagement would be, you know, when you're kind of lost in the moment, whether that's working on a project, colouring in, playing a bit of music, caught up in what you're doing, and time just disappears. And you're solely focused. And sometimes that could be a book, it could be a film. But you're fully engaged and time doesn't matter and you're lost in the moment. Would you say that was engagement?
That would be engaged in an activity for sure. Especially when it's something you really enjoy doing, right? You're fully consumed in that moment. For me, it definitely comes out most in video games. And what about you?
So when I'm working on a new project, I like to spend some time, have an extended period of time where I do focused work and do research and play with ideas and just get lost in that moment. And I often go down to dead ends and stuff, but I do enjoy this because sometimes you need to go down the wrong direction just to know it's not the right direction to go in. So, and this is a popular topic recently. There's been several books. The last book I read on it was called Deep Work. I don't know if you've seen that book.
I've not, no.
And it's really sort of saying that a skill to develop, that he was suggesting that we're losing in our digital age, was this ability to spend a long period of time caught up in this deep work and how beneficial that is for us as humans. And he was talking about, he's quoting Carl Jung. You've heard of Carl Jung. Yeah, so...
Carry on.
So Carl Jung, he built himself a place where he could go and study and think. And I'm doing this because in my head it was a round room, and I think was round, where he did a lot of his research by a lake. Now I'm getting lost in that story, so we're going to move on quickly.
Where are you going with that?
So actually sort of finding time to do this deep work, to get engagement. It's like flow, when everything just seems to work for you. And we think that it happens by chance. But I think that we can actually set up an environment and put time aside to allow that flow state to develop. So I would suggest it's about when you're in flow, you're working to your strengths.
Yeah, and this is known as taking a strengths-based approach. So what you're trying to do is you want to figure out what your strengths are first of all. So
Mine's waffling.
I'm going in depth on the stories. So you want to identify what your strengths are, which is not actually an easy process if you've ever tried to do it for a start, because like we've mentioned previously, it's much easier for us to look at what we're doing wrong or what our weaknesses are, and we don't actually spend a lot of time acknowledging what our strengths are. So we want to, again, try and change some of those habits to actually look at what our strengths are first of all. So the idea being that we then identify what they are so that we can think about how we can utilize them in different scenarios and situations.
Yes. And sometimes something that you think is a weakness can actually turn out to be a strength. So, for example, I'm lucky enough to be dyslexic. And have you ever thought to yourself, actually, how cruel a word that is to give to somebody who can't spell very well? Because even if you can spell, how hard a word is that to spell? So, and I think they asked a dyslexic, how do you spell that? And they went, I'll give it a go. And then plucked letters randomly from the air. D, I understand. And then this X, is it X or Y? Obviously, I can't spell. But why? So I am a creative speller. And when I was a lot younger, I saw it as a big weakness. I felt like I failed school. I failed lots of different things. And it affected all aspects of my life. It affected the type of jobs I would go for. It affected who I saw myself as in the world. And it took some time. But I actually discovered it's actually one of my strengths. There's benefits of being dyslexic. And one of those is that I tend to think differently from other people. And I've come up with different results. And I've always had to find a way to be comfortable with who I am. And now I see it as a great strength. So your strengths could be anywhere.
Yeah, and we want to start to highlight what those strengths are. So again, it might be looking at something that you might perceive as a weakness, but could actually be viewed as a strength if you look at the meaning behind it and what it provides for you.
Yes. Well, there's some research that suggests that 65% of, and this is Malcolm Gladwell's book, David Goliath and the Underdog. It's a book about what we see as disadvantages is actually our strengths, so it's well worth reading. And in there, he sort of says there's been some research done that says that 65% of all self-made millionaires are dyslexic, and he went and interviewed them. I'm not there yet. I'm working on it. And he went and interviewed all these entrepreneurs who are dyslexic. Not all of them, but a handful of them. And they all said the same thing. I don't wish dyslexia on anyone. But it's the one thing that helped me be where I am today. So, and it really shows those things can really make a difference. Sorry, I've kind of hijacked the conversation now.
So when we're thinking about identifying strengths, what sort of processes do you go through to start to think about what your strengths are?
Well, one of the I've been in the training industry for the last 24 now. Is it 20? Yes, for the last 24 years. I've absolutely loved it. It's taken me around the world, and I've spoken in front of thousands of people. And you get feedback forms. So with feedback forms, most people put down their opinions as fact. So it's actually sort of finding a way to handle the kind of feedback that you get in big droves, if you like, and then go, what are the patterns here? So what are the patterns that are recurring? And that's one of the ways that I did it. And I would suggest to anybody, if you find somebody who can give you good quality feedback, go out of your way to find that feedback. It's not always easy. And so we'll get feedback from the comments here. But it is a way to grow quickly. So asking for feedback. And when you ask for feedback from somebody, if you sort of say, can you give me some feedback on, so if we said, can you give us some feedback on our podcast? Most people won't do it because it's just too wide an audience. But if I said, can you give us some feedback on the humour that we use, and then precisely, is the humour on track? Then we're more likely to get the feedback that we're after. And I realise I just opened myself. I'm not asking you to give us feedback on my humour.
So how does that relate to strengths then? How do you take that feedback and identify, if you're specifically looking for an area, what strengths can you take from that feedback that you receive from that area?
Well, one of the things is to take it from I got this idea from authors actually, and they said so when they've written their book, they have some beta readers, or people just read it before anyone else, and they give them, and they read it with the purpose of giving feedback on the story itself. And so what they do, they collect that feedback in, and if 3 people say the same thing, they go, okay, then so maybe this is actually something happening. So it's worth focusing in on this. And then I would suggest trying this new way of doing something for a period of time and evaluating it rather than just changing behaviour based on that. And I realised I think I've taken us off track of the strengths.
Yes.
We've got into feedback.
Yeah. So yeah, that was my question. How do you take that feedback and move it into identifying what your strengths are?
Yeah. So it's an area that through awareness and growth, which is kind of the end result that you're after. I realise though I've just said that. So for me personally, because I'm a bit of a reflector, so I like to think about things. I will think about things for a while, and then I'll start to take some action and do something with that. How about you? Let's throw it back on you.
Yeah, so what I would look to do is identify a leading performer or athlete, whatever it is within your setting, and look at them and think about what the top 30 traits that require them to be successful. And then you take those top 30 and you narrow them down to 10 and think about what strengths do I have from this list of 10. Because what it's actually easier to do is if I were to say to you, for instance, if you're an athlete, what is 3 things that your teammate is really good at? You can probably think of 3 things instantly. They're really easy for you to do. But if I change that question and I said, what are 3 things that you're really good at? It becomes a little bit more challenging. A lot of people don't want to look at that or don't feel like they can look at their strengths in that regard. But if you identify them from another athlete and a top performer in the world, then it takes a lot of the pressure off of you trying to identify strengths. And what you might actually notice is that you identify strengths in them that you have within yourself. So then that's the idea of narrowing it down to 10 and then looking at that list of 10 and thinking, what are my strengths from this list of 10?
And I think that reluctance to sometimes express what we do well as a person is sometimes a bit cultural, especially in the United Kingdom. I would sort of say that we don't like to stand out or feel like it's boasting sometimes. So getting over that, feeling a bit uncomfortable, going acknowledging that actually I do have some strengths.
Yeah, and you use the word boasting. We're not talking about boasting within this setting.
No.
We want to bring out more of that acknowledgement that you do things well. We do things well. We each have our unique strengths. And if we're able to start to think about what those strengths are, then we can be more effective within our work, within our sporting environment.
Yeah.
That's what gets us to the places we want to be. And that's what's going to drive us forward rather than staying at the same level.
Yes. So let's put you on the spot.
Okay.
You know what I'm going to ask. What are 3 strengths that you have?
So I believe a few strengths of mine. First of all, I would say my comprehension. So I've always felt like whenever I've been given, say, an assignment or we've got a task to do as part of a football activity when I was growing up, I'm able to take that information and process it quite effectively so that I can then say, okay, this is what I need to do in this setting. So whether I can actually do whatever's required of me in that setting is another matter, but I can comprehend what's required within that environment. And I think that's one of my greatest strengths.
Yes, I'd agree.
And then second of all, I think another strength of mine is an open and welcoming individual. So especially within my line of work, that's a skill that I think's really good to have.
Yes.
Being able to build trust and relationships quickly is really good to have, and that's something that I feel like I can do quite well.
Yep.
So being open is a big part of that. And then third one I would say would be delivering information in an understandable manner. So obviously coming from a scientist practitioner approach, I often read information with these big scientific words, which I'm sure a lot of you don't care about and don't want to hear, and you don't have any understanding of what it means. But actually being able to take that information and use it in language that is easier to digest, so that you don't have to go away and learn crazy theories or models and words to understand what's actually being said within that.
Yes. And it takes a bit of courage sometimes just to sort of express those and to acknowledge that we have strengths.
Yeah.
And it's different for each and every one of us. And so would you make a physical list? You talk about, say, 30 things. Would you write them down and start to how would you process that?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to memorize a list of 30 off of the top of my head, so I would certainly encourage you to write it down. So take a A4 piece of paper, write down your 30 on one side, flip it over, take 10 from that list and write it down on the other side.
Yes. So, so what about role models? So is it important to carefully pick who your role models are, or does it not particularly matter if you're just looking for positive traits?
Yeah, again, it's not so much the individual that you pick, it's more looking at what are important to be successful in that environment.
Yes.
So what strengths they have. Again, it just naturally it's easier for us to see strengths in others, and then what you might find is that, well, actually, I relate to that. I feel like I have that strength as well.
Yes.
So it's just a process to make that a little bit easier for you, because it can be a bit uncomfortable just trying to think of your strengths on the spot.
I wonder whether that's the reason they say never meet your heroes. Because when we see our heroes, we see them as this kind of a perfect human being, if you like, and with all these wonderful traits. And then we find out, oh, they're human. They have faults as well.
Maybe.
Anyway, that was just a thought.
So, have you ever gone into a business and done any strengths-based work with a business clientele?
I did have a project. So HR approached me, and this was in Jaguar Land Rover. HR approached me and said, we've got this excellent gentleman who is great at his job, but he's lacking some confidence. I won't say his name.
Why not?
Confidentiality. And they were willing to invest in him because he was so good at his job. But his job did include meeting lots of people and having different engagements at all different levels of stakeholders, etc. Mm-hmm. So we did some one-to-one work with him, and one of the things that we did, we took him to a comedy club to do some comedy as well. So he got up on stage and did a bit of comedy, and he found his voice at that point. And we did some work around sort of building confidence within themselves and acknowledging what he was good at, some areas that he needed to maybe work a bit extra at. And it took about 8 weeks, which is actually not that long really. And he came out and he was a different person. And so I think sometimes as you take steps to grow, some of them scary. He didn't want to go to the comedy club. He really didn't want to go to the comedy club. But that's the thing he now looks back on and remembers with great fondness. And I'm not saying that you have to step out and be uncomfortable, but sometimes doing something different, something new. So if you don't cook, go and do some cookery. So a friend of mine, Mark Fox, whose website Slicer Fox is actually really good. He's got a book out on innovation. And he was the youngest man to work at NASA, and he worked on the Challenger. It wasn't his fault; it came apart. But he
what was his role?
But he was actually there when Richard Feynman sort of did talk and explain why it all kind of fell apart as well. So fascinating guy, Mark Fox. And one of the things he says is, he's wonderful to be around. He's engaging. He's interested in everything. So, and I think he flies around the world. And one of the things that he's disciplined himself to do is to read about and explore something that he does know nothing about. So he just read a book on knitting when I was flying over to the UK. So doing something different can really sort of help highlight those strengths. Would you agree or not?
Yeah, putting yourself in new environments might be an opportunity to reflect on, rather than what's going to go wrong in that moment? What can I bring to this situation to be successful?
Yes. Yeah. I also acknowledge that that we thrive well when we do something that we really know well, and that actually when you're in a role that you know what to do, you know the technical side of things, and you know what you can do, you can really produce something great. And so when you look at jazz musicians, because I used to play guitar, played a bit of piano as well. I used to sing, but I use that term loosely. But great guitarists have learnt the scales, they've learnt the chords, etc. And they're not thinking technically, they're just in the moment. And usually playing by feel. And yet, see, you've heard musicians, they don't say that sounds good. They say that has feel, man.
You may have. How many years ago?
yeah, I'm showing my age there. But they talk about feel, don't they?
Yeah.
And that's because they've gone beyond the technical thing, and they're working their strengths, and they're just being there in the moment. That deep work that I was talking about.
Yeah, and that leads us right back to engagement, right? When you're fully engaged in the moment, you often find that you're actually utilizing your strengths in that moment. So you talk about musicians, when they're in that moment, they're utilizing their strengths. They have the knowledge of the guitar, the chords. It's just flowing in that moment for them. They're able to bring their strengths to that moment. And that's where that experience comes from when we talk about engagement.
Yeah, so when you see a great athlete like Usain Bolt.
Usain Bolt?
Usain Bolt, yeah, that's the word. Usain Bolt. That's my dyslexia. It shows up in various different places. And you watch him run, and it looks so effortless. It's just wonderful to watch a master at work.
Yeah, and that's ultimately what we want athletes to achieve. So in those moments, I'm sure Bolt is fully engaged, fully engrossed in that moment. He's bringing out all of his strengths, and he's going into that 100-meter race in a similar manner. Regardless of what sport you're in, you want your athletes to be experiencing that. You want them to be successful, and that comes from them utilizing their strengths and being engaged in that moment.
Yes. So when you're doing that deep work and you're engaged in what you're doing, the brain will fire off dopamine, and dopamine is the feel-good hormone, and it focuses the brain. It tends to also sort of balance out the brain waves as well, so you get an equal measure of the beta, alpha, theta, delta brain waves. Probably not delta because you'll be asleep. But there'll be some there, and it seems to equal out, and so it has a good nourishing effect on your brain, as well as your system, as you go into this deep work. So I think it's healthy for us.
Yeah, and this links straight back to positive emotions, right? In those moments, you're balancing them out, and you're able to broaden your experience and experience those positive emotions within those moments.
Wow. It's worth sort of doing some deep work.
Yeah.
Well, we covered a lot again. So we started off talking about my grandchildren, your children.
Yeah. Again, showing your age there.
Yeah. Now, those wins of the week, which leads to focusing on the positive emotions. And we talked about deep work and how important that is, that engagement.
Yeah. And that engagement is when you're fully engrossed in that moment, just fully involved, and that often comes from utilizing our strengths. So we talked about a strengths-based approach, and first of all identifying your strengths, which can be a little bit uncomfortable for us.
Yes. And sometimes something you see as a weakness can actually be a strength. And so for me, I give the example of being dyslexic, and I now see it as a strength.
Yep, and then we moved on to talk about how you can start identifying some of those strengths. So we had a little bit of a conversation about feedback and trying to get information from others. Then we looked at how you can start identifying your own strengths, looking at someone else and what makes them successful, and then identifying what your strengths align from that list that you created.
Yes, and then we talked about how to apply it in the business context, and Jaguar Land Rover, who really did invest in their employees to sort of, and this particular one person I worked with, to really bring out the best in him and recognise his own strengths. And part of that was getting outside of his own comfort zone. And one of the reasons we did that was really to be able to say, if you take a step back, you can see that actually what you do has applications in other areas of your life. So that is a strength that you have there, that way that you communicate.
Yep, and then transferring those strengths into different areas. So it could be within a performance context. You brought up the example of Usain Bolt. Could be experiencing flow based on him utilizing his strengths in those moments. So again, we want to transfer those strengths into your performances and think about how you can apply them within your performance environment in order for you to be engaged. And ultimately, when we're being more successful in those situations, then that leads to more opportunities for positive emotions as well. So we brought it back around.
We covered a lot in such a short period of time.
Last week.
Excellent. So if you've got any questions, got any comments, please do let us know. Even if those comments are, can we hear more songs about Miles? We can post those. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go and listen to the last podcast.
Or don't. And of course, as always, we love to see your wins of the week. So please do continue to share those. It's really awesome to see your achievements and sharing your successes as well.
Ciao, until next week.
Au revoir.